friends, Chubby Meeple back with another Kickstarter preview for you, and today we're going to take a look at a tiny little game called Microbrew. This is coming to Kickstarter, actually it's on Kickstarter now from the fine folks at One Free Elephant. Let's jump to the table. I will give you a brief overview of how the game plays, and then we'll come back and I'll give you my thoughts on Microbrew. To set up a game of Microbrew, each player is going to take 2 workers in their color as well as 2 cash cubes. And they're going to place their workers near their copper, and this copper is made up of 2 separate cards, so you can see I can split these apart. So this is the copper they're going to be using to kind of form the recipes for their beer, but they're going to take 2 workers of their color, place them next to their copper, and then they're going to take 2 cash cubes and they're going to place them on the 2 0 spaces. So there's a tens row as well as a singles row that'll be used to determine cash as the game goes on. So we have our blue player down here, our purple player at the top. The next thing we need to do is we take the 48 wart tokens, which are yellow, orange, and brown, and we put them inside the tin here. So you'll see some of them are in the tin already. And then one at a time, players are going to draw 1 wart token and fill their copper, beginning in the lower left, filling columns up until they filled the token, until they filled their copper with 16 tokens. And this wart will be used to create the recipes for the beer as the game goes on. It'll make more sense as we go through. And of course, so each player one at a time will take 1 piece. They'll go back and forth, filling up their copper, not looking obviously, so you're going to randomize and use the 10 to set everything else up. Players will then take one of these green malting tokens and replace it and use it to replace one of the wart tokens that is in their copper. Now, it is recommended in the rule book that new players are going to want to take these malting tokens from something in the center near the copper. So we can do that here. Let's say we've got a lot of yellow, so we're going to replace this yellow one with a green malting token. And then up here they've got, maybe they want to replace this yellow with a malting token. So we'll get these replaced. So that's a green malting token, and this is important for being able to move things around for kind of the puzzly piece of the game. The tokens that got replaced, so the wart tokens we removed, as well as the other 4 green malting tokens, are going to be returned to the tin for use during the game. So we'll put those back in the tin and close that. So we've got our copper set up. We are also then going to shuffle and deal 1 customer card to each player. This is that player's first loyal customer, and loyal customers are important for winning the game. They're kind of your win condition. So everyone starts with 1 loyal customer, and we'll talk about the information on the card here in a second. The other customers are going to be placed face down in a deck near the playing area, and you're going to turn up 2 face-up customers. These are what are called thirsty customers, and so you're trying to bring them in and make them loyal to you as the game goes on. We're also going to deal 1 recipe card face down to each player, and then we're going to shuffle the recipe deck and put it in an area nearby and turn up 3 recipe cards. So these are the recipes that we're going to be trying to obtaining by moving our wart around in the copper as the game goes on. We're also going to set up the brewery, which is also made up of 2 cards, and we're going to set the Brewmaster token on the manage space. You'll also notice nearby we have 2 upgrade tokens as well as another blue and another purple worker because you can hire additional workers. We then will turn up 1 reputation card. This is kind of an in-game scoring bonus. In this case, this particular card will give an extra loyal customer to the player who has completed the most recipes of the malty type, and you'll see that on the recipe cards here. The One Free Elephant, he's on camera because he comes in the tin. He's not a necessary game component, but One Free Elephant includes 1 free elephant in every box, so I love to have him on camera. You'll also deal 2 face-down reputation cards to each player, so they have some secret scoring objectives as well. Randomly select a first player and give that player the Your Turn card. The other player will get to draw an extra recipe from the deck and then get to pick one from their hand and return it back to the deck so that they can kind of seed their recipe a little bit. So you've got a first player who gets to go first, obviously, and the other player will have, could have a slight advantage on their recipe creation because now they've already seeded their copper and they can now choose a recipe that's a little closer to what is in the copper. Once you have done all of that, your setup is complete and you're ready to begin playing Microbrew. In Microbrew, the 2 players are competing to obtain the most loyal customers by the end of the game. The game will end when the last card is drawn from the customer deck or when all all 12 customers in the deck are loyal to one player or the other. At that point, the winner will be the person, the player who has the most loyal customers. If they're tied, the player with the most money on their money track is the winner. And if there's still a tie there, the rule book says that beer itself is the winner. Fantastic. Gameplay-wise, you're going to take place over 2 phases, a work phase and a rest phase. During the work phase, you're going to be taking actions such as brewing beer, bottling beer, you're going to be mashing and flushing out your copper, as well as being able to take some administrative actions like forcing overtime, being to upgrade your copper, hiring staff. You'll be able to advertise and serve beer to customers. So there's different things you'll be able to do during the work phase. And then the rest phase, all players will retrieve their brewers from the brewery, and new thirsty customers will show up, new recipes. The brewmaster will move around the brewery, blocking spaces for your workers, and play will continue again until until the last card of the customer deck is drawn, or all 12 customers are loyal customers. So let's take a look at the work phase and the options that you have available to you during that phase. During the work phase, you're going to want to brew beer, bottle beer, and then serve it to the customer who is going to rate it as perfect and become a loyal customer, or to the customer that's simply going to give you the most money. And there's only so much room within the brewery that you have, which is why there's only so many customers to vie for. Each job that you can take during the work phase is represented by a space on the brewery card. So you have spaces for mashing, brewing, bottling. So bottling, this is your flush space, and then you've got spaces for manage, serving, advertising, and a break space up here. And those will make sense. We'll explain those spaces here as it goes. So you're going to place your worker on one of those spaces. Each space can only be occupied by one worker. Now, if you choose to take a space, so if a blue player has placed a worker on this flush space, for example, if the purple player wanted to use the flush space, they can do so. They simply place their worker in place of the blue worker, and they would return that blue worker. So there's a bumping mechanism here. So the purple player can place on the flush, returning the blue worker back to the blue player, and the blue player now has that worker available to continue taking actions. And as long as you have workers, you don't have to pass your turn. So your worker placement can go there. You cannot bump your own worker, however. You can only bump your opponent's. If the brewmaster already occupies a space, you can still send your brewer to that space, but your opponent immediately gets to take a brew action for free. And I'll explain what that means, what a brew action is, in just a second. Let's take a look at the different actions that you can take so we can explain them one by one. First, we'll take a look at brewing. Placing a worker on the brew space allows you to enter kind of the puzzle aspect of the game. When you're brewing the beer, you're trying to swap swapping worts and malting tokens within your copper to obtain a certain combination. Now, the recipes you're looking for in terms of the different colors, so you have yellow, orange, and brown. They represent light to heavy worts, yellow being the lightest, brown being the heaviest. And your recipes are each column of ingredients, if you will, or each column of worts. So, for example, this far right column has 2 orange and 2 yellow worts, which would be great if I was looking at if I needed one of those. So let's take a look at a recipe card here. A little closer look. We're going to take a look at this recipe. This recipe, in order to be perfect, needs 2 brown wort and 2 yellow wort. And that again is going to be represented by having 2 brown and 2 yellow in a single column. So in order to get those columns set up like that, I need to take the brew action to move my wort around. Brewing lets me swap the position. I get to select 1 wort token or 1 malting token that's in my copper, and following the rules, swap that token once or as many times as I would like. The rule is as follows. Maltings, these green tokens, always swap. So if I choose this malting, it would swap with any token that I want it to, as long as I'm moving along the lines in my copper. So I'm not swapping up and down. I'm usually going left and right. I'm always going left and right, and I'm always going up and down at a diagonal. So changing columns as things move. So maltings will always swap. A wort can only swap upwards if its color is lighter than the wort it's swapping with. So for example, this brown token here couldn't swap up here because it's the same color as itself, so it can't swap there. This yellow token, however, could swap with the brown, because it is lighter than brown. That would push the brown down. I could then swap the yellow again, I could swap the yellow again, and I can continue moving in that fashion if I would like. Worts can swap downward, but only if they're darker than the wort they are swapping with. Again, you're only choosing one wort to do your swapping with, and tokens also cannot swap with any empty locations. So as you're bottling beers later, you'll end up with empty spaces that'll need to be filled before you can swap worts with those locations. So let's say for this example, we placed our blue worker on the brew space, and we're going to choose this yellow token. We're going to simply swap it with this brown. So we're just going to do a quick swap here. I'm going to continue moving. I'm going to swap with this brown. And then I'm going to go ahead and swap with this orange. We're going to put this yellow all the way at the top. So now we have, just from swapping, we now have 2 yellows, a brown, and an orange in this recipe. And we have 2 oranges and 2 browns in this recipe. Now that I've taken my turn, the Your Turn marker actually will pass to the next player. And it's important because this card actually has a reminder when the turn marker passes. All beers that have been bottled will ferment, and I'll explain that in just a second. But this card is important to remind players that to ferment their bottles as this card passes. So the card would then pass up here to our purple player, and our purple player would be able to take an action. So they could brew if they wanted, they could do some other actions. So that is the brew action, swapping worts. Let's take a look at another action. Another action you can take is to bottle a beer. Once you make the decision to bottle a beer, you will choose one of the recipes from the center of the table. Or you can choose to reveal the recipe that's in your hand. So in this case, I have 3 brown and an orange that I would need. And you'll notice there are icons on these. So to help with colorblind players, the recipes have icons on them that differentiate the different worts that you need. So I need 3 brown and an orange for this particular recipe. As of now, I don't have that, so I wouldn't necessarily want to do this recipe. Now, that being said, you can certainly choose to go ahead and bottle a beer. It would keep it from your opponent. But if you're bottling a beer, you're going to reveal a recipe card from your hand, or you're going to choose one of the face-up cards in the center of the table. You will then select a column of your copper and remove all 4 ingredients from that column. So, and then you'll add them to the spaces of the recipe that you chose. So let's say we chose this recipe in the center of the table, and we chose this column here. So I've got 2 yellow and 2 orange going along with 2 brown and 2 yellows. Now I can place these, I'm going to take these 4 recipes or these 4 ingredients off, and I can place these on the card in any order that I want. Obviously I'm trying to match the ingredient type. So by putting 2 orange on these 2 brown spaces, I'm not really helping myself a whole lot, but I am matching up the 2 yellows just to kind of show what the bottle action does. So obviously, like I said, you're wanting to try and match up your ingredients to the recipe, but you can bottle because you can use that to kind of quote-unquote hate draft your opponent in a way. If you see they're going for a certain type of beer and they're almost there, you can choose to bottle that beer, maybe get a little bit of cash for it. It may not get you a loyal customer, likely will not get you a loyal customer, but it at least would help you gain some money that you can then use, and it also would help block your opponent. So that's one of the strategy pieces of the game. Once I have selected my ingredients, place them on the recipe, I pass the Your Turn card to the other player, which also reminds me to ferment all of my beer, or ferment all of my bottles. So in this case, I would take an ingredient token off of one of my bottled beers, and this would be in my play area, so I would likely have pulled this down to my play area. But you would simply remove a token. Now, when your beer recipes that are bottled, when they ferment, you'll remove a token. If it matches the type of recipe or the ingredient the recipe calls for, so in this case, this yellow matches the yellow on the recipe, I simply discard this, and there's no harm, no foul on that. It simply gets discarded to the discard area. My opponent would take a turn. He'd pass the turn card back. All beers again would ferment, so I'd get to remove another token. If I remove an ingredient token that does not match the ingredient called for by the recipe, so when I take this orange token off of this brown, this orange token actually comes and gets placed in a separate contaminated area. This shows that my beer has been contaminated, as in the recipe is not perfect. The ingredients I chose were not perfect for the recipe. And then as tokens come off, if there is a single token once there's a single token in the contaminated area, every time a beer ferments, the token will get discarded. So it'll just simply go to a discard area. However, it's important to keep this token in your containment area in terms of determining if the beer was perfect for the customer you served it to and how much money that customer is willing to pay for the beer that you served them. And we'll talk about that when we get to the serve action. Let's now look at the serve action. So we showed this beer, I selected this beer, filled the recipe, we fermented it appropriately. So over the course of 4 different turns, this beer is fermented. It's now fully fermented and bottled, which is a requirement. Before I can take the serve action and serve it to a customer, I must have at least 1 bottled and fully fermented beer. So if I take the serve action with this beer, I'm going to choose one of the customers that is in one of the thirsty customers that was turned up at the start of the game. So we've got this customer up here who's looking for a beer with a yellow and 3 orange. And then this one's looking for 3 orange and a brown. So this is not going to score very well for me. But just for example purposes, I serve this beer up here to either one of these customers. Now, one of the things that's nice about this is while my recipes are not going to match very well, both of these customers like spicy beers and pay extra money for spicy beers, and this recipe happens to be for a spicy beer as indicated by this flame icon. So what's going to happen is I'm going to choose one of the thirsty customers. I'm going to serve the beer to that customer. And that the way I do that is I pick one of the customers, and we'll just go with this customer here who has 1 yellow and 3 orange on the card they're looking for. We're going to serve this beer to this customer. So we now determine how much money this customer is willing to pay for this beer based on the recipe matching. So we look at, and the order doesn't matter in this case. We need 3 orange and 1 yellow to make this customer super happy. The beer we're serving them has 2 yellow and 2 brown. So we only have 1 matching icon. We have 1 yellow that matches in this case. So what that means is we have a beer that is muddled. You're matching 1 icon, so the sides on the beer are your payout. So if you have 1 icon that matches, this is for 2 icons that match, 3 icons that match, and if all 4 match, the beer is considered perfect and pays out this dollar amount. Now, so we only had 1 icon that matched, so we served them a muddled beer. They're willing to pay us $1. They're also going to throw in 2 extra dollars because we served them a spicy beer. So we're actually going to get $3 for this beer, and we simply track that on the cash marker down here by moving up our lower cube up to the 3 space. Now, one of the important things to point out here is we have this contaminated token that is down here. When we serve beer, when you serve a beer to a customer, if you have a contaminated token, this contaminated token automatically bumps the level down 1 space. Which what that essentially means is if we had matched, let's say we had matched 3 of the ingredients and they were willing to pay us $4, because we have a contaminated token down here, it actually ticks down 1 level and would tick it down to rough, so they would only be paying $3. Now the level can never drop past the lowest level, so even though we have a contaminated token down here, it's not going to drop it down to where they don't pay us for the beer. They have to pay us something, they drank the beer. So that's one important thing to point out. The other important thing to point out is since the contaminated token down here makes the recipe get ticked down, and basically the customer satisfaction level ticks down 1 level for the contamination token that we have, it is not possible to serve a perfect beer. So even if we had matched 2 yellow and 2 brown to the customer, if the customer needed 2 yellow and 2 brown, the beer would not be considered perfect because of this contamination token down here, because when we made the recipe itself, we didn't match the tokens appropriately. So it's very important to try and match your ingredients as closely as you possibly can to the recipe to get the recipe right, to avoid these contamination tokens, so that you can then match them up to the customers who are looking for that particular beer. The next thing we need to do is we need to determine if they're a loyal customer of ours. A customer will become loyal if the recipe on their card matches the recipe of the beer you served them. Obviously, in this case, it didn't. So we would need to serve them a perfect beer in order to make them a loyal customer. Since we did not do that, they simply go face down back to the thirsty customers pile. They're no longer thirsty. And there are things that will reset that. Had they rated that beer perfect, this customer would have been added face up to our loyal customers, and we would be able to pull one of our placed workers back out of the brewery and put them back in our supply so that we have access to that customer. Let's take a look at mashing. To mash, you're going to place one of your workers on the mash space of the brewery. And mashing simply means to take the tin that has all the wort tokens in it, we're going to give it a shake to mix everything up, and then without looking, we're going to draw one at a time, and we're going to fill every empty space in our copper. So right now we have 4 empty spaces. We're simply going to fill those in one at a time, going from bottom to top without looking in the tin, so I don't know what I'm pulling out of here. I could end up pulling out green malting tokens. I could end up pulling out anything yellow, orange, or brown. So in this case, I pulled 2 yellow and 2 brown, which would have been fantastic for this recipe up here that we just used the brewing and serving action on to demonstrate. But that's how things go sometimes. Again, taking the action has me pass the card on to the other player. So the your turn card will pass at the end of every action that you take. That is the mash action. Now, if you would ever empty this tin during a mash action, you would take all of the discarded wort tokens and simply add them back to the tin at that time. They don't go back in the tin as you're completing recipes and fermenting beer. That's one thing that's important. The other action you can take to affect your copper is to flush. When you flush, it's a flushing. Obviously, you're going to place one of your 2 workers, up here in the flush space. When you flush your copper, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to return all of the discarded wort tokens back to the tin, so that they're back in there. So that's another way to get them back in. You can now swap any or all of your malting tokens. So any green tokens that you have, you can now swap those out with the color of your choice. So now you're looking through the tin and grabbing the wort pieces that you would like, so you're able to actually select and not draw blindly. So if I wanted to replace this, so I've got basically a yellow, a brown, a yellow, an orange, a brown, and a green malting token in this particular column. You know, I see this token here needs a yellow, 2 oranges, and a brown. Maybe if I take the flush action, I would take the tin, I would return these 4 discarded pieces back to it. And then I can come in here and I can take an orange token out of the tin, and I can replace this green malting token with that orange token. So now on my next turn, I can choose to bottle that beer using this recipe, if my opponent doesn't take it, of course. And now I've at least got the recipe perfect and can now look for a customer to come out of the customer deck looking for that same beer so that I can obtain a loyal customer. So that is your flushing mechanism. It's a great way to kind of seed your copper as you see fit. Another action you can take is to advertise. On this advertise space on the brewery, advertising is a way, again, you have to have a fully fermented, uncontaminated beer in order to advertise. So again, we have to have a beer that's been bottled, it's been fully fermented, meaning all of the ingredients have come off of the card, and it cannot be contaminated. So again, the recipe would have to match perfectly from the ingredients I took out of my copper to the ingredients on the card. They'd have to match perfectly. So you have to have a non-contaminated, fully fermented beer in order to advertise. When you advertise, you move into the advertise section with one of your workers. You will pay $4 per loyal customer that you already have. So in this case, I would pay $4 in order to advertise. And you're going to add a new customer from the customer deck face up to the list of thirsty customers that are up here. So that helps you try to flush through that deck and find the recipe that matches the beer that you have that's fully fermented before you serve it. So there's a good way to do that. You are going to select one of your fully fermented beers. So after you've advertised, you've brought it, flipped a customer face up, you're going to choose one of your fully fermented, uncontaminated beers and a thirsty customer who matches the beer type. You're going to add that customer to your loyal customers, and then you're going to return the recipe back to your hand. So essentially what that means is I would get to flip up a token, a thirsty customer. All of the customers have a beer type. So for example, if I look at this customer, you can see this beer type here has the green label on it. Some of these beers have the Rosie the Riveter yellow label, and then there are other beers that have kind of a tropical, almost a tropical logo icon on here. So you're going to find a customer that's face up in the thirsty customers, including the one that you turned up. This customer is going to get added to your loyal customers as long as you have a beer of the type. Now in this case, it's looking at the type and not necessarily the recipe. So that's another way of gaining loyal customers without having to match the recipes perfectly. You're going to return the recipe to your hand, and now you've gained a new loyal customer. Next, we're going to take a look at the manage action. Now the brewmaster starts on the manage space, and you can still go to that space. It just gives your opponent a free action. The brewmaster will move around. You'll see the arrows that kind of indicate where he moves. So he's got basically 3 spaces that he moves around between manage, flushing, and advertising. So he's going to start in manage, he's going to move up to flush, he's going to move to advertise, he's going to move back to manage at the end of each, during the rest phase, which we'll talk about in a second as to what all happens during the rest phase. But essentially I can go to that space. whether the brewmaster's there or not. If I go to the manage space, I have some options. I can pay money to do certain actions. The first thing I can do is overtime. If I pay $1, I can do overtime. This allows me to take back one of my previously placed workers, so that way I don't have to rest quite yet. The other option that I have is called 3 recipes. So I'm going to pay $2. I'm going to draw 3 recipes from the recipe deck, and I'm going to add one to the revealed recipe. So I'll draw 3 cards from this deck. I will add 1 to the revealed recipes in the middle of the table. I'll add 1 to my hand, and then the other one will get given to, goes back into the recipe deck. I am allowed to hire staff. If I hire staff, I will pay $3, and we'll get to add my additional worker that is over here next into my own pool. So now I will have 3 workers to use for the remainder of the game. The other option I can take when I choose the manage space is to pay $4 to upgrade. If I do so, I will take one of these upgrade tokens, place it in my ready space. That will indicate I've upgraded my copper, and now I have access to this side tank, which basically gives me 4 more ingredient spaces that I can fill in and use to create recipes. So now I'm basically creating 5 recipes in my copper as opposed to 4, and that can help me get to those perfect recipes, those perfect brews a lot faster. The final space we have in the brewery that we can take is the break space. That simply means it's break time. If you place a worker there, you're going to earn $1. So you'll tick your cash marker up 1. So you're going to earn $1 basically from the vending machines in the break room. You'll also flip up any face down customers that are in the thirsty customer area in the middle of the table. You'll flip them back face up. So if we're taking the break action, we'd flip them face up and we'd gain $1 down here, because these customers are now thirsty again. And that is the break action. It's that simple. After each player has used all of their workers, meaning neither player has a worker in their available supply, we enter the rest phase. The rest phase, there's a series of steps that happen. First, we gather our brewers. So each player is simply going to collect the workers or their brewers back from the brewery and add them back to their supply. The next thing we do is we flip customers. So any face down customers that we have, whether they are in the thirsty pile or in our own loyal customers, because we can still serve beer to our loyal customers to earn money, you'll flip them back face up. We will then add a new customer, meaning that we'll flip up a new card from the customer deck and will get added to the thirsty customers line. So we'll add a new one. We also add a new recipe. So we flip up a new recipe, which gets added to the center of the table, and that helps speed the game along. Final step in the rest phase is the brewmaster works, and that simply means that the brewmaster moves from the location they're currently located in to the next location following the arrow. So in this case, they would move from manage to flush. And now, if anyone goes to the flush, now their opponent, so if I go to the flush space now, my opponent would get a free brew action. Now that we've done the rest phase, we're ready to return to the work phase. This is going to continue until the last card is drawn from the customer deck, or all 12 customers in the customer deck have become loyal customers to one player or the other. Once that happens, you will finish out the round. So once the last card comes out or the last customer has become loyal, you'll finish out the round, you'll play one more full round, and then determine a winner based on who has the most loyal customers. If there's a tie, so if it's 6 and 6 or 4 and 4, if they have the same number of loyal customers, the winner is the most has the most money in their money track. And if that is still tied, then beer is the overall winner. Let's jump over and I'll give you my thoughts on Microbrew. So that's Microbrew. Again, coming from the fine folks at One Free Elephant. Cute little 2-player game. Fits in a little Altoid size mint tin there. This is obviously a prototype version that you're seeing. It's pretty close to final component quality. Art's going to be a little different on the final as opposed to this version that you saw. But what did I think of it? First and foremost, I absolutely love the puzzle aspect of the copper and trying to figure out how exactly to swap those wart pieces back and forth in order to get the recipe that I need to fulfill one of the recipes on the table or one that I've got in my hand. I really like that puzzly aspect. It's kind of that spatial relations feel of how do I move this around, and oh man, if I could just get one of these orange tokens here, but I can't move any orange tokens up any further because everything above the orange is yellow. Now I'm in trouble. So then you start figuring out, okay, well now I can swap with my maltings because the maltings always swap, and then I can take that flush action and swap those green tokens out for the orange or whatever color that I need. I love that aspect and kind of puzzling and piecing that together. I like the aspect of the game having some hidden information. I have a hand of recipes that my opponent cannot see, and I really enjoy that because, you know, they may think I'm going for a recipe that's on the table, and they may bottle a beer trying to block me, thinking they're being smart, they're going to make some money, they're going to stop me from taking the recipe that I want, when all along I was working for the recipe in my hand, and now they've bottled an imperfect beer that they're just going to get money for, and now I've bottled something perfect, and I've got another loyal customer, and I'm just one step closer to winning. I love that aspect of the game and having the hidden information. I like the ability of being able to take workers back, going to that managed space, paying an extra $1 to play some overtime and take a worker back. I really enjoy that, and being able to kind of help mitigate only having 2 workers or 3 if I've already hired the extra staff. I really like that aspect. It adds a little bit of a twist to the worker placement. You know, I can bump down my money. Obviously, having less money to do other things with, but it gives me that aspect of getting a worker back so that I don't have to just sit there and let my opponent continue to take turn after turn after turn simply because I've run out of workers and they have workers and things that they can do. I've always liked worker placement games where I can choose to bump my opponent. I want that space. Of course, I'm paying for it because I'm giving them a worker back, which is going to let them take an additional action. I've always liked that mechanism, and I'm glad it found its way into Microbrew as well. Component quality-wise, I like everything being in this tiny little tin. It makes it super portable. It's a 2-player game, so it's something you can take along and play while you're traveling in a hotel room. It doesn't take up much space at all. The footprint on the table is fairly small, so you can play it on a hotel room, bedside table or something like that while you're on the road. I really like that. The wooden components are fantastic. If I have one minor little quip, it's that the little wort tokens and malting tokens are kind of small, but I have fat fingers, so that's a very minor gripe. The game is very playable. It certainly doesn't interfere with the enjoyment of the game overall, but definitely check out Microbrew. There's going to be a link to the Kickstarter in the description of this video. If you're watching this video on the Kickstarter page, there's obviously more information here on the Kickstarter page that you can check out, but I would highly recommend this especially if you're into 2-player games. You want something that's portable that you can take with you and play, not just at home, but it's something you can toss in your bag at game night or on your way to game night and play. I would definitely recommend Microbrew. It's a nice puzzly aspect, gives you the worker placement feel that you're looking for, and there's some strategy. There's a lot of depth of strategy in this little tin. So that is Microbrew from One Free Elephant. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer those. And until next time, keep gaming, friends.